Good morning, I'm Bear with BearIndependent.com, and we're going to do the brief. But before we do the brief, I just briefly wanted to touch on something that was on my heart on the way back in here this morning. I had a conversation with my badass administrator. I have several admins for the different businesses, but one in particular we refer to as the badass administrator. And she has been reading Jocko Willig's book, Extreme Ownership. And I've read it, and several other people on our team have read it or are in the process of reading it as well. And we were having a conversation about businesses and about people and life. And we realized that what we're trying to do, while extreme ownership is absolutely a good policy, what we're trying to do is extreme stewardship. We acknowledge everything we have comes from the Most High, the creator of the universe, right? And we're just here for a moment of time, spinning around on this blue marble, right? Man's days are short. And so we're trying to be good stewards of one another, of the people the Father has blessed us with. We're trying to be good stewards of the resources He has blessed us with, whether that's been cash flow or land or animals or opportunities, whatever it may be. And without diving too deep into that philosophy, my encouragement to you is, you who tuned in for the intel this morning, is what areas of your life, do a survey of your life, what areas of your life could you be a better steward of? How can you build the people up around you? What opportunities are you not taking because it's scary and it's a bunch of hard work? Life, the world, has the potential to get stupider. We have an unprecedented amount of debt as compared to GDP. Financial calamity seems to be right around the corner, not only for the United States, but for nations around the world. Our leadership, domestically and abroad, is, per usual, lackluster at best. And resources are getting tight. Energy, food, material, everything's tightening up. In order to be able to thrive in that set of circumstances, you have to be willing to take risk, calculated risk, and you have to pour more into the people around you and engage more of those opportunities as they come. I think things are going to get harder, but not necessarily worse, if you take the opportunities now to build meaningful relationships with people, to plant and grow food, to make the appropriate moves now. You know, Proverbs, the prudent man foreseeth evil and hideth himself. It would be prudent, given everything that's going on in the world, to put yourself in a position where the world cannot abjectly destroy your life. See, it's the end of the world as we know it, potentially. It's not the end of the world. People continue, people perpetuate. Excuse me, allergies. People perpetuate. And I think we have an unprecedented opportunity to take personal responsibility for where we find ourselves now. To not farm out the teaching of our children to somebody else. To not farm out the provision of our home to somebody else. To not farm out the protection of the people that we love to somebody else. To not farm out the food that we eat to somebody else. But to put your hand to the plow and do the meaningful work now. That if, when things get stupider, you don't get stupider with it. Now, let's do the brief. Bear Independent brief, 8 April 22. The global arms race is shifting amid current concerns, further defining alliances between nations. The AUKUS deal, previously announced in September of 21, has recently led to a greater cooperative focus between the US, the UK, and Australia on advanced hypersonic and anti-hypersonic weapons technologies in light of the current relations with Russia. Initially, the deal was focused on nuclear submarine development due to the tensions with China, so a shift of focus there. That was until Russia had said it deployed a hypersonic missile in Ukraine that was beyond the ability of current defense technology to reliably track or intercept. In response to the announcement, the UN ambassador for China said, quote, "Anyone who does not want to see the Ukrainian crisis should refrain from doing things which may lead other parts of the world, aka China and Taiwan, into a crisis like this. As the Chinese saying goes, if you do not like it, do not impose it against the others." End quote. In other words, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In Beijing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Linjian said, quote, "Their ultimate goal is to create the Asia-Pacific version of NATO and sever the U.S. hegemony outright. Asia-Pacific countries are, of course, firmly opposed to this," end quote. He also chastised the U.S. for its $95 million deal with Taiwan for the Patriot air defense system. 3 Western countries have reaffirmed that a free and open Indo-Pacific was still a key goal of the partnership. And of course, everybody's heard at this point that Pelosi was going to make a diplomatic trip to Taiwan, and China essentially said, "Try me, bro, F around and find out," which promptly resulted in her canceling her trip. And this is where, when I talk about weak leadership, and I've had people comment here in ways they're right. So, Bear, you're not for sanctions, but you're not for large-scale conventional warfare either. What are you for? What are we supposed to do in this situation? Unfortunately, we find ourselves in a pretty bad situation. What are we supposed to do? We've known for decades, or at least suspected for decades, that our next major war would be with China. If we've known that, how come we haven't acted like it? And getting back to weak leadership, why are we allowing ourselves to be threatened and pushed around? There's myriad answers to that. Most of it, in my mind, has to do with the political relationships between the United States and China. Additionally, I think a lot of what comes out of China is simply rhetoric to save face. It's a very Asian concept of saving face. China needs the United States. We are their largest trade partner. They own 38% of our farmland. We are entwined in their debt, and they are entwined in our debt. It's very much so a mutual love-hate relationship. And it also makes me wonder on a larger scale, how much of that is just theater? How much of that is just for show? Because as we've mentioned over and over again, governments strive to maintain legitimacy among their constituency, right? Which is why China has to say the tough things. But what's interesting to me is that we're not. The United States is not saying the tough things anymore. Getting back to weak leadership. So what should we do? Well, I think it would start with not allowing oneself to be pushed around on the world stage. I think it would also involve, frankly, not sticking our nose where it doesn't belong. And that's where I think we find ourselves in these situations in Taiwan and in Ukraine and elsewhere. There are political and economic interests that unfortunately seem to be unable to be resolved with words that may end up being resolved with tanks and guns and planes and bombs and hypersonic weapons and yada, yada, yada. There's no good answer. But if you're gonna have a fight, in my mind, if we know the fight's coming, have the damn fight. There's basic, super basic, three basic tenets one wants to maintain and or achieve: speed, surprise, violence of action. No speed, no surprise. We telegraph every move that we have. And violence of action, haven't seen that at all. But this also gets back to fifth generation warfare, a game of narratives. And because of the globalization of the world and the world's economies, we've seen this. Literally, if China gets sick, the rest of the world could potentially shut down. COVID, anybody? And so maybe that's why. I'll give them a dab of grace here. Maybe that's why the leadership is trying very hard not to step on anybody's toes. But it certainly comes off as weak. And I think there's something to be said for speak softly and carry a very big stick, and to know how to use that very big stick as well. Speaking of NATO, Russia has recently made clear that if Finland and Sweden join NATO, then it would, quote, rebalance the situation, end quote, by ensuring their security on the western flank. Reuters reported, quote, Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, which it says aims, among other things, to degrade Ukraine's military potential and prevent it from becoming a bridgehead for a NATO attack, has prompted the two Nordic countries to consider joining the U.S.-led alliance. Another comment there, and I thought it was a good one. Several of y'all have had these comments. How come nobody's talking about if Russia's reason for war in Ukraine is not wanting NATO on their western flank? If that's their reasoning, if they occupy Ukraine, guess what? They have NATO on their western flank. Yes and no. Geographically, yes, but Russia itself now has a buffer zone of Ukraine, which is a very large country. And the idea here of proxy wars, or don't fight the war at your mailbox, right? Ukraine's not Russia. But if Ukraine could be brought into the fold of Russia, that gives the Russians a different chessboard to play chess on, rather than their home turf. I believe Putin wants a buffer zone. He doesn't want his enemies right up on him. But even then, again, that's third generation warfare talking. Because with the proliferation of high-tech weapons, it don't matter. It does not matter where the bad guys are. The United States has technologies that could wipe Russia off the face of the earth. Russia has technologies that could wipe the U.S. off the face of the earth. And they could be deployed, you know, Putin could be sitting in the Kremlin, make a phone call, and that process starts. Biden, or whoever's in charge, his handlers. Yes, and I know so many of you have made so much hay out of Obama's appearance at the White House. Dude, it's smoke and mirrors. The whole thing's a show. They're all a bunch of actors, and the team that they're playing on is not your team. They're not there for you. They are there for them. If they were there for you, they wouldn't get paid $140,000 a year and have $100 million stock portfolios. They're not there for you. They are there for them. It's smoke and mirrors, bread and circuses. It's all a game. But my point is, the technology exists. Should one actually want to destroy the world, it would literally be over before we knew it. So there's something to say from a third generation, large-scale conventional warfare standpoint of, I don't want my enemy on my doorstep. What's crazy now, what makes it so hard to do the mental calculus now, is that the considerations become third gen, large-scale conventional warfare, fourth gen, insurgency, whether it's state actors or non-state actors, and fifth gen, war of narratives, and asymmetric warfare, unrestricted warfare as the Chinese call it, and having to deal with all those things at the same time. And so on the one hand, it makes sense for there to be a buffer zone in between Russia and NATO. On the other hand, it doesn't matter at all, depending on which course of action is taken. All of which, frankly, is an indication of instability and greater instability around the globe. Things are becoming less predictable. And by the way, as a business owner, predictable is profitable. So let's say you're a politician now. If things are less predictable, it's going to be less profitable for you. You're going to be able to maintain less of your legitimacy. And the less legitimacy that you have, the less likely your constituents are to support you in the role that you find yourself in. As it stands today, the Kremlin has decided to change course and narrow its focus to capturing the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, the DNR, LNR, Luhansk, and Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss called this shift, quote, a new and different phase, end quote, and said that NATO will be supplying new equipment to oppose the Russian offensive. The U.S. is providing intel to Ukraine specifically for operations in the Donbas. Remember that the Ukrainian-U.S. relationship preceded this war by at least a decade, perhaps much longer. The foreign minister for Ukraine said at a news conference, quote, the battle for Donbas will remind you of the Second World War, with large operations, maneuvers, involvements of thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, planes, artillery. This will not be a local operation based on what we see in Russia's preparations, end quote. And there's actually an article from the World Economic Forum that we're going to read just a little bit of here in a moment that addresses that. Again, this is third generation warfare. The idea of World War II, guns and tanks and bombs and planes. In an unprecedented move, the General Assembly of the United Nations voted to suspend Russia from its Human Rights Council. The BBC reported, quote, 93 UN member states backed the US-led move to suspend Russia. But there are 193 UN members, so less than half voted in favor. 58 abstained, 24 voted against, and a further 18 were out of the room, having what UN diplomats wryly call a, quote, strategic coffee break, end quote. Oh, dude, sorry I missed the vote. Had to take a piss. Oh, I didn't know. You know, they just brewed a fresh pot of coffee and I had to get me some. My bad, bro. My bad. Now, if you're on Patreon, you have the relevant links, and if you're not on Patreon, you don't. There's a link in the description to get on Patreon. It's $5 a month. It's the best $5 you can spend on the internet, says me. So, from the World Economic Forum, and I am subscribed to their daily email blast, not because I support them, but because I want to see what their messaging and their rhetoric is. Generally speaking, you can infer what somebody's going to do or not do from what they say and the language that they use. And so I like to try and stay on top of the language that they're using and at least what they're talking about. That's something to understand about media too. Media in all its forms, social media, written media, news, radio, podcasts, whatever you might have. The media can't tell you what to think, but it can tell you what to think about. And we have to be very careful of thinking that we have a fullness of understanding over anything, because so many of these things can be red herrings and misinformation. And they can oftentimes have you thinking about this thing over here, the war in Ukraine. Well, what the hell is going on over here? Right? The old sleight of hand trick. So from this article from the World Economic Forum, and it is long and verbose, and so I'm going to paraphrase as much of it as I can. Russia's forces have been badly depleted, and so they must make choices about where to concentrate their efforts. Estimates vary about how many of the battalion tactical groups, the main unit with which Russian armies organize its operations, they have left. Of those involved in the first wave of the invasion, often elite units, some half, maybe more, have been either damaged beyond repair or can be repaired but are not usable in the near future. The casualties, wounded and captured as well as killed, perhaps represent about 20% of the original 190,000 forces. That'd be roughly 38,000 casualties since 24 February. We know from assiduous work that Russian equipment losses have been heavy. For example, 425 tanks are known to have been destroyed, damaged, abandoned, or captured. There are reports that many of the replacement weapons being brought out of storage suffer from the effects of age and corruption, lacking key components and with ordnance that does not work. Aircraft and helicopters, which are also aircraft, fixed wing, rotary wing, but whatever. Aircraft and helicopters have shown themselves to be vulnerable to air defenses, and many have been shot down. The inability of Russian air power to impose itself remains one of the remarkable features of this campaign. Russian personnel reserves are also not in a good state. Moscow has been casting about for extra bodies, whether Syrian volunteers or the mercenary Wagner group. As already noted, the Belarusian army is no longer available, while troops from South Ossetia, the breakaway enclave in Georgia, have decided, when asked to go to Ukraine, to decline the invitation. There is a huge new cohort of conscripts about to join the Russian army. Conscripts have already been used, Putin claimed without his knowledge, but there can only be risks in putting unwilling young men into battle without training. Of course, even half the original Russian force is still substantial, and it now has fewer and more manageable tasks to accomplish. But its position is not straightforward. Having decided to concentrate their effort, the Russian High Command still has choices to make about priorities. They do not yet appear to have wholly given up on Kharkiv. Meanwhile, they have been shelling Mykolaiv on the southern coast, on the road to the important city of Odessa, and many have posited that the next Russian goal will to be establish essentially a land bridge of occupied or controlled territories in between Russia and Crimea in the southeastern region of Ukraine, which encompasses the DNR and LNR, the breakaway republics there. For some time, there's been speculation about an encirclement operation that would enable them to trap the considerable and capable Ukrainian forces in the Donbas region. But these objectives are easier to accomplish than drawing red arrows on a map than in practice. They carry risks. They are prepared to relinquish their gains in Kherson, where Ukrainian troops have been pushing them back. If Ukrainian forces can take back Melitopol, might Russian forces to the south get caught? Simplifying somewhat, the Russians must work out what offensive operations they wish to complete before they feel that they can move into a largely defensive stance so that they can hold on to what they have. An analysis from the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War suggests that the most immediate Russian objective will be to take the city of Sloviansk with a population of 110,000. There is some irony in this city taking a pivotal role because exactly 8 years ago, a small force led by Igor Girkin took this city, marking the start of the military actions in the Donbas until he was forced out by Ukrainian forces. Evidence of this intention can be found in a rare Russian military success at the start of April when they took Izium, southeast of Kharkiv, inflicting heavy losses on the Ukrainian defenders, and they've now advanced beyond that. According to the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, Russians have conducted active preparations to resume offensive operations for the past 3 days, stockpiling supplies, refitting damaged units, repairing the damaged bridge in Izium, and conducting reconnaissance and force missions towards the southeast. Russian forces will likely begin offensive operations towards Sloviansk, 50 kilometers south of Izium, in the coming days. Taking Sloviansk would be the first step to a more ambitious objective of cutting off Ukrainian forces in eastern Ukraine. But to encircle the Ukrainian forces, they will still need to meet up with Russian forces advancing from the south. Sloviansk is preparing for the battle, and many of its civilians have been evacuated. If Russian forces are unable to take Sloviansk at all, Russian frontal assaults in the Donbas are unlikely to independently break through Ukrainian defenses, and Russia's campaign to capture the entirety of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts will fail. All that to say, it appears that the next big push will be in the southeast of Ukraine. Who knows? Not I. But that's what all the really smart people are saying. So I suppose we'll see. The big question again here is, how is this going to affect you? I believe NATO wants in on this war. We've been talking about this for weeks, the rhetoric, the posturing. My concern is, and has been, as I've shared with you over and over again, and we don't need to talk at length about it here, that a black swan event is coming. That will be our reason for involvement there. And I think a large part of that is because war is profitable. And the global economy is in the tank. And additionally, war at its most basic is what? A game of resources. the allocation of certain resources, usually men, against the defense of or acquisition of other certain resources, land, energy, food, water, whatever you may have. And as things continue to dry up resource-wise around the world, which we're on that trend, I think there's going to be more and more of an onus for direct involvement in Ukraine by Western countries. Was listening to David Devine at Adapt 2030 this morning, and he was saying that 10 days ago, there were 3 countries in the world that were officially rationing food. As of today, there are 26 in 10 days. 26. Well, there's what, 186 or so recognized countries in the world? It's 1 in 7. 1 in 7 countries is currently rationing food as of within the last 10 days. So I cannot exhort you more strongly to position yourself in such a way that you can be as independent of this broken, fragile system as possible. Because I don't trust the people who are moving the chess pieces on the board. And I think the board is bullshit. Lastly, I've had several of y'all comment, "Hey Bear, you seem pretty somber and calm lately, since this thing in Ukraine kicked off. What's going on? Are you all right?" I'm great. I'm great. We are great. Our people are great. We're blessed. We have everything we need and most of what we want. And I've been preparing for a long time. Not just buying stuff and putting it on a shelf. Not just putting food in buckets. But I have been preparing these hands and this heart and this mind for this type of situation for a long time. No ego, no hubris. I'm not worried about Ukraine. I'm not worried about anything. I have concerns, but I don't worry. Worry is a sin and fear is from the enemy. I'm not worried. It's just kind of like, oh, we're here now. Noted. What do I need to do to be able to navigate? Because we're here now. We've achieved this waypoint. Next. Shoot an azimuth. Start marching. And this comes back to your OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. Many of y'all are observing what is happening in the world, but you haven't oriented on it. You haven't actually onboarded the fact that this is real. This is coming. And if you haven't acknowledged that it's real and this is coming, if you haven't oriented on it, you can't decide on a course of action. And if you don't have a course of action, if you haven't decided what you're going to do, you most certainly can't act. And so again, my exhortation for you is to determine what can you do if you find yourself worried right now. What actions do you need to be taken right now so you can be in the best position possible for when food scarcity is a thing in the United States, for when fuel is $9 a gallon for unleaded at the pump. For years, the last couple of years, people have been concerned, what happens if they won't let me into the grocery store because I didn't get 2 jabs and a booster? Homie, what if the grocery store is empty? What about that? So, my encouragement to you is to do the meaningful things. Be aware of these things that are going on around the world, for sure. I'm very aware of them, and I have concerns related to them, but it doesn't rule my life, nor should it rule your life. That's what I've got to say on that today. Very quickly, how to support the show. Patreon.com. There's a link in the description. We deeply appreciate your support. Thank you very much. It's $5 a month. There's over 2,000 exclusive pieces of content there. We discussed this morning on Patreon loadouts for ladies, because we have a lot of ladies who are like, hey, the world's weird and I need to know what I need to carry and when I need to carry it. Can you give me some suggestions? So that video is up on Patreon this morning. We also, this week, have discussed fighting stance and greenhouses And I just got done shooting a video about Electronet for sheep and Gallagher Smart Fence that'll be up on Patreon soon. So a lot of our homesteading content is there. And then refugemedical.com, own that company. Best first aid kits in the world, handmade, made in America, guaranteed forever. 36 lives saved to date. As well as refuge training. You need to learn how to use your stuff. Time's short. Time is short. And it might not be the Russians or landing paratroopers in your backyard. Statistically, the most dangerous thing you do is drive. Mom, Dad. Statistically, the most dangerous thing you do is drive. And statistically, 9 out of 10 preventable deaths in the United States of America are from uncontrolled bleeding. That's why you need a bleeding control kit. Not a boo-boo kit. Not like a feel-good 97 items in a Chinese nylon sack. No, you need a bleeding control kit. That's what we do. We make real life-saving kits at refugemedical.com, and we teach people how to use them at refugetraining.com. Your promo code is BEARNATION for free shipping on everything in the store at Refuge Medical, and for 5% off all classes at Refuge Training. So check those out. Links are always in the description. And by popular demand, y'all asked for something affordable that I can get right now if I can't afford a Bearfac or an SOB. This is the bleeding control kit, okay? This comes from North American Rescue. Prime components. It's got one Cat Gen 7 tourniquet in it, one 6-inch emergency trauma dressing, 2 packages of wound packing gauze, 2 pairs of gloves, 1 pair of their responder shears. These are their basic shears, not their advanced EMT shears that we include in our kits. 1 North American Rescue survival blanket, 1 Sharpie, and 1 just-in-time instruction card. These are $57 at the store at refugemedical.com. Okay? These will fit in your glove box. This will probably fit in your purse if you're a grandma. It'll definitely fit in the desk drawer of your school or your office or your bank or your cubicle land or your wherever. There's also a very strong likelihood, as the world continues to get stupid, that we see an increase in domestic bad actors. It's not, but by the way, it's not just getting shot, which is the thing. But again, motor vehicle accidents, construction site accidents, chainsaw accidents of people who have been saved with refuge medical gear, like their lives saved. Motor vehicle accidents, blast amputations from mines in Afghanistan, law enforcement officers who were stabbed, chainsaw injuries, negligent discharges, gunshot wounds, skid steer with an arm damn near ripped off from a piece of heavy equipment, crushing injury on a job site. If you have blood in your body, you need a way to keep blood in your body. Bleeding control kit, refugemedical.com. By the way, our stores close at sundown. So if you need one of these kits, just go ahead and get it now, because the store will be closed at sundown. I appreciate y'all, I really do. And I want all of y'all, every one of you, don't be a follower of me. Don't be a follower of anybody. Be a leader. That's what we're trying to build here at this channel. I want people who will lead. Your people, where you are, in your situation, in your context, with your skills and your giftings and your talents and your delights and your wisdom and discernment. Don't be me, but perhaps let this interaction that we have help you be the best you that you can be where you are. Because the world's getting stupid, and I don't want you to get stupid with it. Bless y'all. Shalom.